On July 15th, 2022, Sony bought Bungie for a staggering $3.7 billion, leaving many of us to wonder, why'd you spend that much?
Show me the money.
Since the purchase, Bungie has killed at least 2 Sony projects, launched its worst Destiny 2 expansion to date, and missed its estimated earnings by 45%.
It's not about money, it's about sending a message.
It hasn't even been 2 years since Sony bought Bungie. What the hell's happened? Well, to figure that out, we're gonna have to go back in time and figure out why Sony bought them in the first place. In a 2022 earnings call, Sony said that they would have 10 live service games out by March of 2026. The number would eventually get bumped up to 12 before eventually getting knocked down to 6. We're reviewing this. We're trying as much as possible to ensure that these games are going to be enjoyed and liked by gamers for a long time. This is being said by the current Sony president. He would then go on to say, of the 12 titles, 6 of these will be released by fiscal year 2025. That's our current plan. As for the remaining 6 titles, we are still working on that. And if you're wondering why they would suddenly pivot, the answer is always money. It will always be money. But in a more realistic sense, 2 things. Genshin Impact being number 1. You know, Genshin, worth 23 billion. No big deal or anything like that. Sony can't ignore that kind of money. And secondly, a game that Sony actually owns that goes by Fate Grand Order. It's a mobile game it's really big in Japan, and it has actually earned them over $7.3 billion, but that game is really on the downslope compared to like newer live service games. And obviously Fortnite. Everyone wants the Fortnite money. Still, making the pivot from mostly having single-player studios and single-player franchises to live service games is not easy. So you might be wondering, how are they going to do it? Well, my good friend Todd Howard has the answer.
All of this just works. It's not, I'm not kidding.
For every successful live service game you have, there are 10 that are dead or dying. This is not an easy business to be in, and Sony understands that. So, they looked for some help. At this point, Bungie had already been booted by both Microsoft and Activision. Booted's not the right word, but they don't work together anymore. So teaming up with Sony was going to cost a premium. Here's the other problem. Sony had already revealed that they were making a bunch of live service games. So then you go to Bungie, and these are guys that have done well with their own live service game. Suddenly they kind of have all the cards. I'm saying this because $3.7 billion for Bungie seemed really steep at the time. Let's not forget, Microsoft bought Bethesda for $7.5 billion, and you got Skyrim, all the other Scrolls, Fallout, Wolfenstein, Doom, Arcane Studios. Well, they closed one of Arcane Studios, but the other one is still open. This is what happens when you take a week to get a video out. Anyways, back to the original script. You get a lot for $7.5 billion. On the other side, Embracer bought Gearbox, which basically was Borderlands, for $1.3 billion. Regardless of what I think, they pulled the trigger and bought Bungie. So Sony buys Bungie for their expertise, which we understood. What we didn't understand was that this was going to involve killing some projects. Now look, I'm of the opinion that more video game projects need to be canceled because too many hours, years are wasted making mediocre games that go nowhere. But this was a little extreme. So, Bungie grabs its scythe, heads down the hallway to check on a few projects, reports back to Sony that it's been eyeing a very particular one that they think should be canceled. As we now know, The Last of Us multiplayer, Last of Us 2 multiplayer, whatever they were going to call it, has been canceled. Remember that quote earlier from the Sony president? Ensure that these games are enjoyed and liked by gamers for a long time. Bungie ultimately thought that The Last of Us multiplayer would not keep players engaged in the long term. So Sony pulls the plug on the multiplayer from The Last of Us, and just a quick reminder, this was a few months after the wildly successful first season of The Last of Us. So instead of capitalizing on the hype, they canceled the game, and I guess now we can scratch one of those 6 live service games that was coming by 2025. So now we're down to 5. So naturally, fans were not happy, journalists were not happy. I'm of the opinion that Naughty Dog should stick to single player. Hey, that's just me. And honestly, this was not nearly as bad as what was to come. Leaks have their pros and their cons. When you don't know about a game and it gets killed, nobody really cares. However, in the Insomniac leak early in 2024, we learned about a secret death. A death of a game that, well, we would have enjoyed, I think. And that was a co-op Spider-Man game. While I can't place the blame directly on Bungie, I have to assume the pivot to live service plus the keep players engaged thing made Sony look at Spider-Man and be like, we might be able to keep players engaged for a week, maybe 2. And they cut the project. It sucks because, again, I actually think Insomniac should be making single-player games or co-op games, but if they don't make a Spider-Man multiplayer game, then no one's going to. So Sony calls them in for their expertise, and their expertise says to cancel games. That's a little rough, but it's not as rough as what's to come. The other thing that Bungie has done since joining up with Sony is releasing their worst expansion to date, which is called Lightfall, or Lightfall, however you want to put it. You could argue this transition into Sony's family had an effect on this, but I don't know. I don't buy that. It's sitting at a 69 on Metacritic, and it's mostly negative on Steam. And judging from the Helldivers 2 situation, if the community wanted to boost that, they could boost that, so they don't want to. Fans were upset. The story was apparently really bad, confusing, convoluted. It's Destiny, so that's not too surprising to me. I checked out on the story long ago. However, outside of the story, there's something that no players can ignore, and that was just the fact that most of the content was either reused, reskinned, and overall just lackluster. One of the bigger issues for me, the gameplay, is that you had increased cooldowns for your abilities. And I don't know why you would do that, because the cooldowns in Destiny are already insanely long. So for me, that was a big no-no. However, on top of that, there was another thing that would increase, and that is the price of microtransactions. Naturally, if we increase the price of microtransactions, players spend more and our revenue goes up, right? That's how that works, right? Well, wrong. Bungie missed their estimated earnings by 45%. That's right, 45%. That's fucking massive. I think the big issue for a lot of people was the Battle Pass, Season Pass, whatever you want to call it. That got a slight boost from 1,000 silver or whatever it is to 1,200 silver, which isn't a big boost, but there's no option for the 1,200 pack. So you either have to buy 2 $10 packs or, the $25 pack or whatever, and that pissed people off. So it's been about a year since Sony's purchased them. This is really the time to be like, hey, we know what we're doing. We got our stuff under control. And then they miss earnings. That is a huge red flag. When billions of dollars are being tossed around, you cannot afford to have these types of mistakes. Missing earnings is a huge red flag. Missing them by 45%? Well, personally, I'd be wondering if the guy saying, hey, this is how much we're going to make, actually knew what he was talking about. I'd be wondering if maybe we need some different leadership there.
I don't trust you, Phyllis.
And that currently seems to be what is happening over at Bungie. Now, this is a grain of salt type of rumor for sure, because it came from a YouTuber. And as a YouTuber myself, we definitely don't know what we're talking about. So let's not expect Sony to take everything over right away. First off, I think there's a couple of things going for Bungie right now. They do have Marathon coming. Marathon's a game I am not even remotely interested in, but it has 20 million views on YouTube, and that ain't nothing to laugh at. The one thing Bungie definitely knows, gunplay and shooting. I'm not worried even remotely. Marathon's going to be great. The thing is, they have to make it to Marathon. As of right now, Marathon is slated for 2025. I'm assuming it can hit there. And then they have Destiny 3 in the works, but I would assume that's at least another 3 years off. So I wouldn't even count on that. By then, Sony will have made the decision whether or not they're taking over. The bigger hurdle they have currently is regaining the trust of the Destiny 2 players, and that's their next expansion. I will go ahead and say that Destiny 2, it's called the Final Shape, their next expansion, by the way, it's going to have to not only hit expectations, but exceed them. Like, you cannot miss earnings. You need to basically reverse the 45% loss. And I'm not envious of that position, but Bungie has also put themselves in that spot, so it is what it is. I'm currently reading a book called 11 Rings about Phil Jackson. He's the legendary NBA coach who led Jordan and the Bulls to 6 championship rings, and in the book he talks about how winning the first championship not actually that hard. It's winning the second and third that becomes difficult, because the players, the coaches, everyone gets kind of entitled. We've done this before, why can't we do it again? And through that, you start to lose your focus and you lose your process. Ultimately, I think that's what happened to Bungie. I think they needed to get popped in the jaw. They did. Like, okay, we're coming back out round 3 and we're going to be readjusting, and hopefully this new expansion is going to hit. I have faith. Bungie's been in the industry too long. The biggest issue they have, obviously, is they need to sort that season pass out. I don't know if they're going to reverse the price or what, but we'll see what happens. I think they got it. What about you guys? What do you think? Do you think Sony's just going to take over? I mean, it's a big investment. Or do you think they're going to let Bungie do their own thing and hopefully get it right? Or do you think Bungie's just not going to mess with the microtransactions and hope everyone forgets? Leave a comment down below and let us know what you think. Anyways, Sony just put out their Helldivers fire, so they might be kind of pumping the brakes for a few minutes just to make sure that the horde of angry fans don't come down on them again. Bungie's safe until their next expansion, at least. If that screws up, then we might see something change. But if not, maybe we'll see what happens with Marathon. Alright, that'll do it for me. Later, Gators.